All right. How's everybody doing? All right. My name is Brent Stevens, and I'm the open source compliance lead at Fannie Mae. And today I'm going to speak with you about some strategies that you can employ if you're working in a highly regulated environment, if you want to increase the number of open source contributions that your firm is doing. Okay. About me. So I've been with Fannie Mae for approximately 10 years, and I've spent the last 2 years in open source. Prior to being in the open source program office, I ran a lot of projects in the CTO organization, as well as the CIO organization. And before Fannie Mae, I worked on a number of public sector engagements on the West Coast and East Coast, both in the federal and state levels. I also have a penchant for Gibson guitars, and those are my beautiful dogs and my lovely family. All right. So you've probably heard about Fannie Mae. In a nutshell, what do? We provide liquidity to the secondary mortgage market. I really didn't understand what we did, when I first joined the firm, so I'll give you the quick rundown. If you were to go to your bank and take out a mortgage, a 30-year mortgage, and your application was accepted, your bank would then take that mortgage, bundle it with maybe 100 other mortgages, and then sell those mortgages to Fannie Mae. And we would guarantee those loans for a fee. And that's really how we make the bulk of our money. I will say that I was also surprised when I joined Fannie Mae to know that almost half of the employees that work at Fannie Mae are software engineers. So we are a legitimate fintech organization. One of our VPs in the DevOps space a few years back said, you know what, we're using a lot of open source on our stack. Maybe we should ramp up our level of governance and make sure everyone is working with open source in a consistent fashion. So the OSPO was formed, and it's got basically 3 arms. My role is really around the compliance side, but all 3 of these teams work in tandem to execute a lot of our open source programs. And because we are regulated by the FHFA, the Federal Housing and Finance Authority, we have to be very prescriptive with the type of engagement we do with the open source community and how we use it in-house. T1s to today. So, I at one point in my life, I thought I wanted to be an attorney, so I studied, criminal justice in undergrad, and I changed my mind once I finished. I said, you know what, I want to work in technology. I can feel the wave, the energy is coming. What can I do in that space? So the first gig I had out of school was to sell T1s. I was going around in DC and knocking on doors saying, hey, would you like a faster internet connection? And it was a wild time, and it was not for the faint of heart. After about 6 or 7 months, I showed up at work one day, and people were standing around in the stoops with kind of like just a sad look on their face. And I was, what's going on? And the doors were locked, and that was it. And this was a time when like the dot-com bubble hadn't quite burst, but it was starting to crack a little bit. But I did enjoy that experience. So I said, well, I'll go work at another startup. And that one did better. That one was bought out a couple times, and actually we did pretty well. At one point I had an office overlooking the Potomac River in my early 20s, and I thought, man, I'm gonna retire when I'm like 35. This is great. And then the bubble burst, all right? And so you know how that happens. And I remember coming home that night, and I had seen the writing on the wall, but I came home that night and I was talking to my wife. I was feeling pretty dejected about some of my life choices. And she kind of looked at me, and out of the blue, she says, well, how would you feel about moving to Alaska? My boss called me today and said that we just won an award to implement a case management system in Juneau. And my mind was just kind of spinning, like, where did that come from? But sure, why not? And so a month later, I was living in Juneau, Alaska, and shortly after arriving there, I was brought on to the firm as a software tester. And so I would run through my test scripts, document the findings, pass them back to the developer, rinse and repeat. And after like 6 or 7 months of that, it was a snooze fest. I wasn't into it. It wasn't until we were about to go live with our system, and I had to put on the hat of those case management workers out in the field who were managing their children, because they were social workers. And I said, how was their job going to change on day one when we flipped the switch, because it was a big bang, right? I have to go now to these modules, I have to talk to these people, like everything's different. And they were concerned, they had a lot of questions. They were resistant. What we did was we developed an organizational change management plan to kind of bring those folks along. And that was really the first time I made the connection between how technology can really impact a person's life in the day-to-day. So why am I talking about OCM? Because the basis of it is understanding your audience. And so I would venture to guess a lot of you have a lot of these same groups in your organizations. And they care about the same stuff typically, right? Legal cares about license compliance and IP. Don't let the IP out the door. It's a big problem. Architecture. Business, what do they care about? Speed, innovation, strategy, risk. Not just operational risk, but financial risk, reputational risk. That's big. Everybody remembers 2008. All right? So that's important that we manage that. DevOps, developer experience is important. Version compliance, making sure that our CI/CD pipelines are running smoothly. Cyber, all right, detecting vulnerabilities, making sure that we have remediation plans in place. Well, the open source program office sits in the middle of all that. And what we're tasked with doing is consulting back to these groups, partnering with them, making sure that they understand how we're supposed to engage with open source. We're not going to do the work for them. We're a small team, like 6 people. But we can bring them along on their journey. I'm genuinely interested in this question here. So has anybody here ever been to Panama or been through the Panamanian Canal? Got 1, 2. Okay. It's pretty amazing, right? I was lucky enough as a kid, 1st through 4th grade, I lived in Panama. My stepfather was a Marine. And one of my fondest memories was sailing. We had a little Hobie cat, and we would sail all around. And I remember just being flabbergasted at how these giant cargo ships could fit through the canals and the locks. And seemingly they only had like a foot or 2 on either side. Like I was thinking, is the captain just able to eyeball that? Like how is that possible? No, he wasn't eyeballing it. There was a Panamax standard, right? It's a list of requirements that ships need to meet in order to get to the other side. It has to have a certain size, which can actually change during the rainy season and dry season, so there's some nuance there. The types of communication system that they have on board, there's a requirement there. The propulsion system that they use. In a similar fashion, if somebody wants to contribute to open source in Fannie Mae, they have to pass through ARC now, right? This is more of a gauntlet maybe. But we're going to ask them some questions, right? Does the project really benefit Fannie Mae? Is it aligned with our strategy? Is there a contributor license agreement in place? Or do you need to sign one, and are we okay with those terms? If you've actually created the code, can we scan it and make sure we're not going to be releasing any IP? All right, sound governance really enables the trust. So when we think about this, we don't want to make it too complicated, right? Because you can go down a lot of rabbit holes. So what we've done is we've taken some existing requirements that are in our space, and we've just kind of been beefing them up recently. And so there's essentially 5 requirements that we want our teams to adhere to around how we're contributing back to the external community, making sure that the projects that we're using are compliant and using permissive licenses, comprehensive inventory. Where is the open source living in our stack, right? If somebody wants to build an application, we need an SBOM. We need to see where all that tech is living throughout our stack. Version lifecycle management. Surely you are not running one of your core technologies on the end of life or end of support runtime. Nobody's ever seen that happen, right? Community engagement. It's like why I'm on this stage today. And one of my colleague, Joe, gave an awesome talk on InnerSource yesterday. And we're always trying to give back to this group and Linux Foundation and other consortiums because we believe in open source. We don't want to just take, we want to go upstream. We're consumers. So that's why we're here. So great, establish some requirements. They're sitting out there on a piece of paper. How do you actually meet those requirements? With procedures. Think of them as job aids that need to be clearly written, they need to be accessible, all of them have to have a RACI, right? So if I'm Joe Blow working down in an application squad, I need to know if I'm responsible or need to be accountable, right? For a particular aspect as it relates to managing that open source. And proactive maintenance, right? We don't want our procedures and job aids to collect dust. Controls. All right. So how can you prevent any unsupported or non-compliant open source from coming into in-house over the firewall? And if it makes it in, how do you detect it once it's there, right? The way you can get through this is to automate your enforcement, because expecting things to happen manually is not going to work for you. Of course, you've got leading and lagging risk indicators. We have to understand what our threshold is. We're not going to expect 100% compliance all the time. So what is our comfortability with, say, I don't know, 80% compliance to these requirements? Well, it depends on your organization, right? And last but not least, reports. Show me the data. Where is it? Right? For a lot of these older companies, it can be hard to let people in, right? To have them open up the curtain so you can actually see what's there. We have a lot of different organizations that are just kind of hoarding data at times. And it's not until you really establish that trust and build those relationships that they'll show you what's there. And I'm not talking about just sending me a CSV file once in a while. I need near real-time access in order so I can build my reports and understand my level of compliance throughout the organization. And once I have the data, great. How can I contextualize it for a way that makes sense to the audience, right? I'm not going to share necessarily the same information with a squad than I am with the CISO. So, we'll talk about automation, right? The rule of thumb, right, is if you can automate it, you should. We're not there yet. We are kind of manually walking through a lot of these processes, but eventually we'll work to automate as much as we can. That's really my talk. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. Enjoy your lunch. Thanks.